So, welcome everybody. We are gathered here today at this condolence meeting to pay our respects to the memory of our chairman, but also our friend, colleague, and teacher, Professor Swapan Chakravorty. Swapan Chakravorty joined as chairman of the CSSSC in October 2020, before which he was Distinguished Professor of Humanities at Presidency University in Kolkata. For many years before that, he was Professor of English at Jadavpur University, subsequently joining as Director General of the National Library of India, a charge he held along with that of Secretary and Curator of the Victoria Memorial Hall. He was also advisor to the Vice Chancellor on library matters at Ashoka University and Distinguished Visiting Faculty, S.P. Jain School of Global Management. He wrote both in English and Bengali and has written a number of monographs, among which his first book, Society and Politics in the Plays of Thomas Middleton, was the subject of his DPhil thesis at Oxford. He was also contributing editor of the collected works of Thomas Middleton and Thomas Middleton in Early Modern Textual Culture. Most influentially, however, he also edited, along with his colleague Abhijit Gupta, 3 books on Indian book history and print culture. Print areas, Book History in India, 2 volumes of movable type, Book History in India and Founts of Knowledge, and Founts of Knowledge, Book History in India. He also edited a book titled Nameless Recognition, The Impact of Rabindranath Tagore on Other Indian Literatures. Along with Tony Barlow and Susanna Milevska, he published Conversations with Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak from Seagull and Shakespeare from Papyrus in 1999. In Bangla, he wrote numerous short pieces and essays and lectures, too many to be mentioned. But significantly, he published Bangalir Ingreji Sahitya Chorcha from Anushtup in 2004. And he also edited Mudrone Sanskriti o Bangla Boi from Abhabas in 2007. He was awarded the Narasingho Das Prize by the University of Delhi in 2010. That is a very brief summary, really, of a man's life and activities. I've just tried to mention the most significant sort of career events and published material. For this meeting, we shall at the start observe a minute's silence, following which I will call upon some of us to speak. So we have many people amongst us here today. Some among the people present here are old friends. Some are colleagues. Some are students. So we are actually spread over several generations. And I have a few names of people who have volunteered to say something. So I will start by inviting them to speak one by one. And then we shall open it up to the audience if anybody wishes to say something. So can I call upon, to begin with, 2 of his oldest friends from Oxford, Jatin Nayak and Vishnu Mohapatro, who have both joined us today to remember and say something about Swapan. I think that would be the most fitting way to begin. So Jatin, can we start with you, please? And then I will ask Vishnu to speak. I think you are muted. Jatin, can you unmute
Okay.
yourself? Yes,
Am
thank
I
you.
audible now? Am I audible now,
Yes,
Rosinka?
we can hear you. Yes.
Um, this is a very sad occasion, and I wish I didn't have to speak on such an occasion like this, but this is life, and we have to bear with its ironies. It's difficult to believe that Swapan was so full of life, is now alive only in our memory, that we are reminiscing about him, not talking to him or bantering with him. Most of the time we met, we bantered with each other. It's hard to come to terms with the unbearably painful fact of his absence because we had grown so used to his scintillating presence. My friend Dr. Vishnu Mahapatra is here. We are together at Oxford and we have such fond memories of the wonderful time we spent with Swapan and Bhaswati and Pantu. So it's really a very painful task, painful duty to reminisce about someone who seemed so full of life, was so generous and so brilliant. So I remember that about 16 years ago, I was invited by Professor Rosinka Chaudhuri to take part in a seminar held at the Center for Study of Social Sciences in Calcutta. And Swapan was asked to chair that session. I'm sure he was invited to chair that session because everyone knew we were very close friends. In fact, at Jadavpur, no one took the trouble of introducing me at length to anybody. Jasodhara Di, Malini Di, Sajni Di, all the luminaries of Jadavpur University would simply introduce me as Swapan's friend to everyone, and that would do. That was enough. But frankly, I didn't like Swapan to be present in the audience whenever I made a presentation. Because although we are very intimate friends, very close friends, deep within, I was intimidated by his formidable scholarship and his exceptional brilliance. So I never felt comfortable whenever he was around, and I would always ask him, don't come to my seminars. Don't come to seminars where I have to make a presentation. But sometimes he would come, sometimes he won't. But our intimacy allowed us to get over all that, and we would be back to bantering as ever. And on an occasion like this, words seem so painfully inadequate that one can't help falling back on cliches. But when one speaks of Swapan, or someone like Swapan, even worn-out cliches take on a life of their own, acquire a vibrant sincerity and vividness. What I say about him may sound like a string of cliches, but everyone who had the good fortune of knowing Swapan, they're alive with an inexhaustible resonance and aptness. His death has impoverished us all. That's all I could say on this profoundly sad occasion. Thank you, Rosinka, for giving me an opportunity to say a few words about my dearest friend and a wonderful, generous, and exceptionally gifted human being. Thank you once more. Thank you.
Thank you, Jatin. Vishnu, yes.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Rosinka, for this. I think I met Swapan. I think perhaps Jatin introduced me to Swapan or Bhaswati. I don't clearly remember, but it was around 1988 when Swapan joined Oxford. And I'm not going to talk about his formidable intellectual life or his erudition, because that's actually beyond me. But I really wanted to say three things. One, of course, what impressed me about Chopin as an intellectual. Later part of his intellectual life was his bilingual, a commitment to a bilingual or multilingual intellectual life. And you only meet very few intellectuals like Chopin who were as comfortable in English as in Bengali. And and students like us, or people who wanted to follow certain kind of bilingual intellectual life, or for me, for example, doing my poetry in Odia or thinking about Odia literature and doing politics and as an academic profession. This has a huge impact on me. And I know that there are some of my friends who are also hugely influenced by Chopin because of his commitment to a kind of bilingual intellectual life. And not bilingual or intellectual, multilingual in the sense of just communicating in another language. It is more to do with the idea that the constitutive function of that language, that when you write in English, when you think in English, when you think in Odia, you don't really translate one to the other. You really think differently. And Chopin actually was somebody who was excellent in that. And I remember in 2017, I had organized a workshop whose main idea was to say that, look, some of our literary and cultural imagination also can be seen or can be read as an entry into a conceptual world, into a kind of into a world where we can reflect generally about human predicament, whether it is love, whether it is human fragility, whether it's about loss, whether it's about love, whether it's about repentance. There are many such ideas that we, as theoreticians or as philosophers, will deal with by looking at philosophical text. But they can be, the literary world actually is suffused with conceptual imaginings. And to that workshop, Swapan came, and very happy. He always would tell me that this is something, we must create a platform for doing things like this. And he would say that let's think about how to organize resources and intellectual resources and put maybe a website where we can put writings from in Bengali, Odia, Telugu, and see, and we can read them together in workshops like that. This is something which I actually Chopin influenced me a lot. And we spoke a great deal about these things. The second, the two more things that I want to say, two are very personal things. There's something which I learned from Chopin and influenced by Chopin and admired in Chopin is a sense of moderation. That the sense of moderation that he brought into his life while engaging with friends, his style that I saw from a distance, managing institutions, when he was the National Library. So sense of moderation, not a kind of wishy-washy middleness of things, not that kind of moderation. A moderation which actually was based on an idea that sometimes different ideas, even contradictory ideas, can be perhaps combined. Even sometimes things which stand at two ends of the spectrum can be thought of, and there can be a space where you can think of combining them, bringing them together in some sense. And sometimes it's quite necessary for running institutions, thinking about collectives and stuff like that. I greatly admired Chopin for that, because often we talked about difficult situations and he would tell me about these things. But his approach to those situations would really make me feel happy about his abilities to present as a kind of sense of moderation while dealing with people and institutions. The third is about, Jatin spoke about Chopin's generosity and warmth. I think anybody who has really come close to Chopin, bantering, of course, was a very important part of Chopin's life. That, the quick wit, the erudition, the range of things that Chopin can talk to anybody about, and his ability to also to connect to people at various levels. I was a beneficiary of his generosity in many ways. When my son joined NUJS, he was and Basuti were the local guardians of Aranaka and stuff like that. Chopin would come with me to do some shopping and things like that. So things, the kind of warmth and generosity that I received both from Chopin and Basuti. And it is a kind of generosity that actually didn't look for any reciprocity. It is not a kind of generosity that not based on the grammar of that generosity is not based on the idea that, there's based on some equalizing sense of you doing and me doing and things like that. It's a way of really Chopin's generosity, if I would put it in a way that it's a way of opening up to his friends and others. And sometimes I think of that kind of generosity is like a baton, like a torch that your friends give it to you. Not that you give them back to them. It is that you take them forward and maybe hand it over to somebody else. That's the kind of passing on that sense of generosity and warmth. And today, of course, joking, I can't speak, but Chopin taught us that. And I'm grateful that I knew Chopin. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishnu. I will now ask somebody from a younger generation, somebody who has worked closely with Chopin at Presidency and who was a former student here at the center. Shondipon Mitru. Shondipon, are you here? I think because he had said that he might want to say a few words. No. So maybe his connection is not working at the moment. I wanted to, as I said at the start, bring in various generations. So Shondipon was somebody who might have spoken, and Komalika Mukherjee at our center is the other person, but she's not feeling able to sort of express herself. She's here, but she doesn't want to speak right now. I will ask our colleagues then, before I turn to Tapatidi and Partha, if Anirban or Trina could please unmute themselves.
Would Anirban like to go first and I can come in after that?
No, since you're here, go ahead. I didn't actually indicate an order to anybody. So it's absolutely fine if you go next. Yeah.
I didn't actually volunteer to speak. I was sort of quietly trying to stay in the background, but it does seem that I am one of the people at the center who used to be a former student. And frankly, the last week has been exceedingly difficult, and I didn't quite expect that I would feel so strongly about Chopin's passing. I mean, I'd been hearing about his illness and had been worried. I'd been trying to find out from people how he was doing. But the truth is that I hadn't been in very regular touch with him in the last few years. So it wasn't as if I was talking to him very regularly, but it did hit me quite badly. And I think part of the reason was that Chopin's passing, at least for me, is also a passing of a particular time of my life, which in many senses is the quality of that time in terms of the kind of intellectual atmosphere that we had, the kind of life that we had as students at that point of time, that has pretty much gone, not just for us now that we are on the other side of the, table or the lecture room, but mostly also for students as well, I feel. So we were the last batch, I think, of Jadavpur English who sort of who just came before the semester system took over. And we had been hearing about it, and we were sort of trying to, I mean, it didn't quite make sense to us, I mean, what it would mean, but we did get a sense that the way we had been taught in those 2 years, and that had completely, at least for me, changed my life altogether, would no longer be possible quite in the same way. That was something very clear to us. And we were all somehow instinctively quite happy to have escaped it, the system, because what I primarily remember about Shopanda's classes, but also about Shukantada's classes, Shupriyadi's classes is, and I think I wrote this, I tried to write this on a Facebook post the day after Shopanda went, is that there was a long lingering sense of an engagement with a text, with an idea, with a concept, one that allowed for a certain kind of back and forth. It's not that, like many of my sort of classmates at that point have also said, it's not that the first day I walked into Shopanda's class, I understood everything. There were things that really completely were, I couldn't sort of make sense of. What I could tell at a level was that something really complex and rare was going on in these lectures. That was that much instinct I had, I think. And these things other people's, his students would of course also mention. What we found absolutely miraculous is that he would walk in. This was actually true of both Omlanda and him, that they would not quite look at the class much. I mean, they would take the attendance, and then Shopunda had a way of fixing his gaze like right above our heads at the back wall on the center, right? And so it very rarely would he look directly at a student. I mean, if you asked a question, of course he would. And Omlanda also never looked at us. But the thing is, they would come and sit down and begin to speak in absolutely perfect complex sentences with, complex clauses, which made absolutely perfect grammatical sense. They wouldn't stop or, stumble at any point. And we found this fascinating because I had never seen this before, that the whole lecture, not a single time would he have to refer. He wouldn't bring anything into the class, as far as I remember, except for the text. But the whole lecture was like, and it wasn't like he was saying something that he knew by heart. He was speaking to us, definitely. But the sheer organization of it, along with what seemed to be absolutely spontaneous, the fact that he was, doing it right there, right then, because this also happened when you asked him a question. He spoke in the same way, even if the question was unexpected. So this is a skill that sort of really seemed miraculous then to us. That kind of clarity, that kind of absolute the capacity to speak in sort of perfect sentences, and sort of with complex clauses and all of that, which I find it I can't do this. I've been teaching for 11 years, and I don't think I can do this, and I don't think I'll ever be able to do this. That was really, really incredible. And slowly, of course, it was over the sort of, as the year passed, you began to actually understand more, read more, catch more of his references. And then slowly, actually, a certain kind of world would reveal itself to you, which was really fascinating and seemed endless. And I think I realized that also on an instinctual level at that point of time, that a good teacher is perhaps somebody who sort of leaves you with ideas that do not let you rest, in the sense that he doesn't tell you exactly what he thinks and exactly how you should think, but he or she kind of pushes you in a certain direction and then lets you go, and then those things unravel in different ways for different students. That Shobanda was able to do absolutely. Many of our teachers at that point of time, and we were very, very fortunate, was able to do brilliantly. And of course, also the pleasure of being able to read a text over months, and sort of as it kind of opened itself to you, almost like a palimpsest, layer on layer. That kind of close reading, if I hadn't gone to Jadavpur, even though I went in a completely different direction later in my career, I went to sort of looking at performance history first, then looking at performance studies. I think that practice of close reading, that in fact almost compulsion that I had as a scholar, that I had acquired at that point as a scholar, to sort of this read something closely, intensely, but also this kind of obsessive orientation towards detail. If I hadn't got that from people like Shopanda, maybe later I would have been a very different kind of a scholar. That's one thing. The other thing was that he was often quite, his sense of humor was often, in those years, how old were we? We were 21, it would really go above our heads, and we just felt sometimes that, oh, he's being really, sardonic, really mean. And then later it took some time to, like, because if he would be looking at the back wall, and if someone had kind of, dozed off in the third row, he would know, right? Even if he wasn't looking at that person, and he would say, I think if some third row, fourth person, please get up and go wash your face because you've reached the sort of, something like, we just knew, and we didn't know how he knew that, but he just, so he could be quite, and he made really, really sort of sometimes he was incredibly funny, of course, but also quite caustic. But it took me a while longer to realize that sardonic humor, what seemed to be on the surface to be a certain kind of, cynical, sarcastic kind of demeanor, actually had with it a tremendous generosity, which has been already talked about. And what came from him, the affection that came from him, was not the kind of political correctness that has now become quite usual. It was genuine affection. It was a genuine concern for, so he would, he might have said something that you didn't like at that moment, but he would go on later to actually understand that, he said it out of a certain kind of wisdom that, that you did not have at that point of time. For example, when I was applying to Oxford, I went to him for a recommendation, as I did to many other of my teachers from JU. Also, I was applying to quite a few places, so I had gone to Shopanda for 2 or 3 of them, I think. And he looked at my Oxford application and he said, "Why are you applying for the masters? Why don't you go for the DPhil, directly?" And I think at that point of time, I had already got, or I was applying for the Felix, or I had got the Felix. And he said, "If you're going for the Felix interview, why don't you, why don't you sort of make this application for the DPhil, because that will cover more of your, and you don't have to then again after a year decide what you want to do." And I told him, I don't feel prepared for research. I feel that I need a year to sort of understand methodologies, etc. And I just feel too afraid. And he kind of looked at me and he said, "Well, if that's your decision, but I feel that you're more prepared than many other students that I have recommended, so you might have." And then later I thought that was actually quite practical advice, because 1 year later I actually found myself floundering once again, not knowing exactly where to go, how to sort of, but of course, I mean, I sort of, made sort of my decisions at that point, and then got back into a different kind of a PhD, etc. But came to the center, in fact. But the thing is, he was, in fact, in the later years, I was often not in touch. After I came to the center, I would see him at the BOG, but I would also see him because I lived near Obhishikta, and I would be walking out with Spencer's, and he would be walking in, and he would say, কতদিন তোকে দেখিনি, যোগাযোগই রাখিস না. And I would every time intend to, sort of, I remember I said I'll call and I'll come and visit you. And I'd heard at that point that his health was failing, but as it happens, I didn't actually finally make that visit. And Now I feel like more and more, and one of my friends has written recently also written on social media that, we had all thought when we were younger that as we got older, we would never become sort of, we would never cultivate nostalgia as our elders did. But the more we get, the older we get, we realize it's actually, we are becoming more and more sort of nostalgic. And Shopanda's passing actually is also, to me, the passing of one really beautiful, productive, excellent period of my life. And I was thinking of the routine that I saw the first day I walked into the Jadavpur corridor, and it said SKC, and it seems like yesterday. And SKC's classes were the classes that you would kind of look forward to amongst others, and that it really seems like that I had that routine with me as, just like a month back, and it's been 20 years, and it's Shopanda gone, but also a time that I think will never come back in quite that same way. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Trina. Anirban, would you like to speak briefly? And then I'll ask Shobhik.
Practically, with me also, I really didn't think I will speak here, but maybe a few words. So, like I was never a student, Shapanda, and as a few of us who are moving into the humanities and the social sciences from a different stream, Shapunda was one of those people who welcomed us like very generously, as everyone is speaking here. And practically we didn't have any idea of like what kind of person, what kind of scholarship he had when we first met. And as you all know, like he would never like give an inkling of that. But gradually, like as we talked, I remember like for the first Bengali book that I edited, I had one of his essays for that book, Bangla Binirman or Binirman. So. And that essay also was published in a very like, little magazine in Bangla from where I got it. So gradually we talked, and I felt a very certain fondness which I didn't expect. And again, like as you all of you who had interacted with him would know, like that was his signature. And an indulgence, definitely. So, just from the personal thing, one other thing was very interesting for me. Like he was always very particular with the sciences of the body, like about his illnesses, about what happened to which part of the body. He was always very much aware. And he would say, well, I may not be a doctor, but I know about it like a doctor because I'm a patient. So that went on. And this kind of fondness I really remember. But to understand what he was doing, his work, the importance of his work, and definitely I would today say like the greatness of his work, I began to realize later. And just I'll say only two things about this very briefly. One is definitely every one of us knows here that he's very intimate, very close association with the vernacular, like Bangla writings, and he was writing intellectually astute and like conceptually, philosophically, and about literature in Bangla. Like especially for the last few years, I was always telling him, why are you not putting them into a book? And he said that he was doing it. I don't know from where it is coming out, but I think it will be something which is fantastic, which definitely, and with that, especially about his dealing with the literary, about how he thought about the literary. Again, two things I would say. One is about the literary. I just now offhand I remember one Bangla essay that came out in Anushtup about 1 or 2 years back, where he was trying to talking about the role of literature, the necessity of literature in today's academia. And he was talking about literature in terms, he was very clearly, he stated this. We all know about his clarity about the literature is not about affection, but the need to have a very reasoned approach to literature. And maybe I forget now. He was talking about the critical distance which one learns from literature, and the necessity of that, and the political which it opens up. That was very, very important, and I think that was his very, very important element which he was bringing in, a philosophical, a conceptual approach to literature, but through and from within the literary itself. Not it's not like he was using concepts to think about literature. It's not that. So, especially Bangla writing has been losing people. It's becoming poorer and poorer. And Swapanda's, his writings, we still have many things to learn from that. We still have many things, many engagements to do with those writings. I think.
Thank you, Anirban. Shobik, would you like to go next? Are you there?
Yes, Rosinka. Yeah. Yeah. It is quite difficult for me to speak, like Trina has said. Actually, I was in a meeting with Trina when we both heard the news and been trying to come to terms with it. Swapanda was my tutor in my second year in Jadavpur University. I was very lucky. I had Omlanda, Swapanda, Shukantoda as my tutors. And Swapanda was someone who would look out for me wherever I went, and even after that, and who genuinely took an interest in my work. I mean, many people have talked about his generosity. I will add my voice to that. So I'll just talk a little bit about kind of the early days, really, when, as my tutor, he would actually give us a lot of marks. I mean, he would mark us really, and in those days, that was quite a rarity. To get a 78 was kind of unthought of. But he kind of, I wrote this, I remember he gave us this essay to write, the comic theme of education in Emma, which was absolutely which totally boggled me. I didn't know what to write, but I wrote something. And then he gave me a lot of marks, and it was a very short essay that I wrote, like a side of a page. And he said that my tutor used to give me a lot of marks, so why shouldn't I give you a lot of marks? And to that kind of irrefutable logic, I had no response, obviously. So I still remember his kind of comments on my essays. He told me that double tick means that I like this very much. Single tick means that I agree. And then there was another classic comment, no contractions in academic submissions, which I still remember. So that's kind of Swapanda. I mean, and I don't really know where to begin. I mean, most of my memories with him are very humorous ones, and he would always have a twinkle in his eye, and then when he would say something very, very funny, but he would say it with a very deadpan poker face, and it was just difficult to not laugh out loud. He would say it in a situation where he knew that he would make you laugh, and that was, so you'd have to struggle to kind of, stop oneself from laughing. I spoke to him. I was kind of in touch with him. All through very recently, and he was also at presidency where I was just before I joined the center. But even after I came to the center, I was kind of I would call him now and then because of random things. Whenever I needed to know something, I would just kind of like go to Swapan as my fallback solution. So my last time I called him was because I wanted to know about board games in the Renaissance, things as kind of as esoteric as that. But he kind of, I remember the last time we spoke, he actually took a lot of time in talking to me about how he felt when his first book came out with Clarendon Press. Apparently, he did not know that his book proposal had been accepted and Clarendon wanted to publish it. And it was Kate Telscher who actually told him that, they wanted to publish, he should go and talk to them. So, and I was just totally, this is fascinating stories he would tell, but then it was, what was, really fantastic about it was that he would treat you as an equal. I never felt that he was treating me like a former student or a junior colleague, or it was always as somebody who was an equal, and he would just kind of say things. He would kind of really make somebody feel important. I remember that this is something Amlanda also tells me, that you could never say no to Swapan, because I remember he would just ask me to turn up at all these kind of like extremely kind of usual kind of meetings and projects, and I would just be there really. I remember he called me from Delhi to come to the National Library to look at its website. And I just kind of turned up as soon as I could, really. So yes, that was Swapan for me. I'm very, very I don't know how to describe this, but somebody whom I looked up to a lot, and who kind of who was kind of just around all the time I needed advice and help and any and of course kind of I cannot think of Swapan without thinking of his humor. There are lots of things which there's just kind of too little time to talk about here. So I will struggle to come to terms with it for a long time, I think, and as I believe that many of us here will. So yeah, thank you, Rosinka.
Thank you, Shobhik. So I'm going to say a few words myself now. I have known Swapan for a very long time, and I thought I'd like to just say something about knowing him. I realized while thinking about what to say today that my interaction and friendship with Swapan, like that of Vishnu and Jatin, who have spoken already, goes back 30 years, which is actually a very long time. Because like others here, Topatidi as well, I think, was there at the time. I too first met him as a student at Oxford. It was the reason that I never called him Shopunda, much to the puzzlement of others sometimes. He had gone, I think, on a Teachers' Commonwealth Scholarship. I don't know the official name for it, but it was a Commonwealth Scholarship that was given to, in those days, to young lecturers who wished to avail the opportunity of getting their PhD degrees in Britain. And I had traveled from the University of Pune after having completed my MA and MPhil there. So again, in my case also, it was unusual to have enrolled directly in the doctoral program without having gone through a second BA. Most of our other friends in my generation of students did their second BA first before they got into the DPhil. So in different senses, really, we were both anomalies among the Indian students in Oxford, as others also were. 95% of the students there at the time seemed to be from Delhi. The rest were from Presidency or Elphinstone College. I can't recall now. I was trying to remember who introduced us and when and where. But in all likelihood, it would have been, I think, the history faculty tea room opposite the New Bodleian Library. Many of us worked all day at the India Institute, housed in the New Bod, and we all trudged downstairs at exactly 4:30 p.m. or converged from other places wherever people happened to be, to cross the street to the history faculty building, which served a hot cup of what can only be called swill at 20 pence. The biscuit that if you wanted a biscuit, it cost extra. So Chopin's wife Bhashwati would also be there. She was studying for her doctorate in nearby Reading, and they lived in married quarters at Allen Bullock Close. And with them, one could lapse into Bangla, relax for a while. It must have been there that we first met. Chopin returned to Calcutta very soon after that, perhaps that year or the next year itself. And as he settled into the routines of lecturing, writing here in the city, after applying for jobs and all of that, both of them, we did stay in touch. And the main reason for that was actually, I think, thinking back now, was for the intellectual connection with him. He was a scholar of the Renaissance, but the range and facility of his interests was astonishing, as everybody has been saying, of course, today. His DPhil thesis was on Thomas Middleton, but he could talk about Modigliani, Picasso, Rabindranath, the Bengali cultural sphere, everything. And everything he spoke about, he was passionately involved in. Also for me, for us, most unusually, he was very responsive to literary texture. Anirban has just spoken about something he wrote about it, but it was a revelation to see the manner in which he responded, not just to the political content of a piece of writing, to see what a keen reader he was of the sentence. At a time, actually, when it seemed as if most critics had forsaken any interest in the musicality of words on the page. Trina also spoke about this, staying with the text for a long time. This made him a very responsive and unusual reader and thinker in the time of not just as the 90s progressed, not just post-colonialism, but many other isms. And I've turned to him often in all these years, not just to solicit information, and of course he had a huge fund of facts at hand at any given time. You ask him and he could tell you. But also to ask his opinion, which I always respected because I knew him as having an unprejudiced mind and as one who did not take sides. So with regard to contemporary literature as well, it was good to talk to him about books that had just been published and were being published at the time. I'm also very thankful that I was able to persuade him last year to join as chairman at the center at a time of crisis. I had watched him in action at board meetings where he was West Bengal representative for many years, and the level of accuracy with which he could quote the rules was a new side to him, I discovered at these board meetings. And we were always very, very thankful for his support, instruction, and guidance through many a stormy meeting. And I think Taupati will attest to this when she speaks. That's why I was certainly sure that he would be the best person for the job, and I was so happy when he accepted the position. Who knew that his tenure would be cut short so cruelly before he had even, actually, he's not even completed a year in this position. Yet I also want to put on record that in the space of that short time, it was with his help substantially that our application to the West Bengal Education Department to regularize our center as a grantee moved forward and reached the level of success that it has reached. We would not have managed this if it were not for him to be there. I spoke with him just 3 days before he was admitted to hospital. There was a Buddhadev Bose essay I needed and I couldn't find it anywhere in the city. I thought he might have it in his collection. You would all perhaps have seen his brilliant lecture on Buddhadev Bose last year. It's on YouTube if you want to catch it even now. This was the first virtual lecture on the occasion of Buddhadev's birth anniversary. It's an event that we've been organizing annually. he said he had the book, and I was asking him whether I should send somebody to go and get it. So it was a shock to hear that he'd been hospitalized, and the fear and worry, of course, was immediate, because he had been in frail health for some years following the strokes, following everything. I think it was willpower actually that was holding him together, and there were many complications from these previous health issues. So we were very worried when we heard that he had to be taken to hospital, and then that he had to be put on the ventilator. When someone dies, one thinks only usually of oneself, how much we'll miss him, what an absence his passing will create for us, how our own worlds are depleted with his loss, and all of that, of course, is true. But with Swapan, I think, as indeed with Hari, apart from all of these feelings, I have thought primarily of him as well, that he should have had more time. Time to write, to read, to chuckle, to admonish, to spend with his wife and son, to live life to the fullest. He shall be genuinely missed. I'll stop there. I will now ask Partha if he would like to say a few words. Taputidi, whoever would like to go next. I didn't actually circulate an order, but I did ask them to speak. Moidul also has said he would like to say a few words. Yes, Partha, please go ahead.
Well, I can't exactly remember when I first met Swapan. It must have been at some meeting at Jadavpur University, sometime in the 1990s, early 1990s, I suspect. But as almost everybody here has recounted, that one of the first things that attracted me to him was his humor. And everybody's described it. Trina, I think, described it very effectively. But lots of people have very sharp sense of humor, quick repartee, but of a kind that almost makes you want to keep a distance. Swapan's wasn't like that at all. His repartees were sharp. They had very interesting wordplay, but there was a curious way in which they made you come closer to me. There was warmth in it. There was a sense of affinity, and that I remember distinctly in all of those usually quite brief meetings that I had with Swapan in that period. And then I didn't know of his. I wasn't familiar with his academic writings, because of course, in a field that I normally didn't read very much in that field. But I did come across some of his Bangla writings in various magazines and so on. They were all extremely thoughtful, and I have to say this struck me very carefully crafted in terms of the use of language. This was certainly very clear in the way he wrote, that he took great care in writing. What I remember very clearly is a long meeting I had after he had had his cerebral stroke and he was still recuperating. Anirban's mentioned this, his great interest in the medical side of the human body. And I remember being extremely struck by the way he described his linguistic confusions after his stroke, the way he couldn't find words, aphasia. I remember he said that he addressed the doctors as Dakat Babu. Now, I wouldn't put it past Swapan to have invented that story, but even then, I mean, it showed you how, his ability to make light of what was really a very, very severe physical condition. But what struck me was he actually went into, and this I still remember, he went into a long series of observations about our relative access to the mother tongue, which one has presumably acquired in some kind of natural way, and an acquired language. And his confusions in this period made him think very, very profoundly. He wondered whether they actually were lodged, these two languages were lodged in different parts of the brain. He had very, very interesting things to say about that. I remember that conversation quite vividly. After that, of course, I got to know him again a little better when he was at the National Library. I was put on the advisory committee of the National Library for a couple of years, and I attended some of those meetings. And what was very clear to me was, well, Rosinka just mentioned his familiarity with various rules, his ability to navigate this absolutely impossible bureaucratic system of the government of India, but he seemed to be able to do it. But what was even more clear was the enormous respect he had achieved among the professional librarians. Chopin was never trained as a librarian, but I think it was his incredible, the depth of his and range of his knowledge about books that I could see they were in awe of this person, even at these meetings. So, and then of course, in more recent times, I've interacted with him quite regularly at the Jadunath Bhavan, the various projects that we have taken there, and Tapati, of course, knows this much more greater detail. Again, as Rosinka was saying, his interventions and suggestions were always thoughtful. They were carefully thought out. They were very precise. He knew exactly why he was suggesting this or that, and clearly open to debate and all of that. But this was an interesting side that a lot of scholars, especially humanities scholars, one has this general impression that they would make very poor bureaucrats. Chopin was not like that. Chopin could have been an excellent bureaucrat. So I think that it's probably because his very, very close attention to detail, which came to him almost naturally. He trained himself. Apart from this, I don't have very much more to say. But as I keep realizing all of these things that have happened over the last couple of years, the number of people who are much younger than me who have just gone makes one think, about the absurdities of the natural course of life. But anyway, such are things today. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Partha. Tapatiri, would you like to go next? Yeah.
Being brave enough to turn on my video. Can I be heard?
Yes.
It was hard to say no when Rosinka asked me to speak about Chopin, even though I'm battling a personal medical crisis of some kind. But then Chopin has been battling so many medical crises about which he rose and performed all his professional and intellectual work. Over last year, but for a long time now, but especially since last year, for me, the boundaries between life and death have become completely blurred. So, Chopin to me is not dead in a way that many others close to me have not really died. I mean, they remain with me. There are people who you don't see for years and months. I was suddenly thinking that I never really saw Chopin as chairman of the center because, of course, it's been all online meetings. People are not going to office anymore. So the brief period when he did take over from Johorta as chairman, I was not able to pull his leg even about, taking on one more admin responsibility. And so in these virtual worlds, Chopin will live on. I remember very clearly his Buddhadev Poshu Bhaktita, Sharuk Bhaktita, and we'll go back and listen to them. My association with Chopin goes back a very long way. He was 2 years my senior in Presidency College, but he was Chopin as Bhashati was Bhashati. Bhashati I knew from school. They were a pair, and I would later joke to them that they must have been one of the only couples I know from Presidency who survived, and how wonderfully they survived as a couple. It's hard to think of one without the other. The other day, somebody said it's hard to think of you without Hari. I suppose so, when there are partnerships that go back so many years. And I feel the same for Bhashati. It's almost impossible for me to think of a Bhashati without Chopin, and I know just how bereft she must be feeling. College days came and went. I overlapped with Chopin very briefly in Oxford. So when Vishnu and Jatin spoke, I remembered those few months in Alan Bullock Close when we overlapped. I was finishing. Bhashati had come a year before to Reading, and Chopin had moved into Alan Bullock Close. So this was where Vishnu also stayed. Jatin, I don't think, stayed there. And there were many common friends. But Chopin moved there. Before that, Bhashati would come and go. Chopin, Bhashati then moved to Oxford. So they moved in, and within a few months, I moved out. I'll never forget, they helped me, women of my generation and of my physical stature, I always prided myself saying I can carry my own bags. That was the one occasion when Chopin actually helped me carry my bags down. And he kept saying, "Eta mone rakhbe, je ami tomar suitcase gulo niye gechilam, eta kintu kokhono bhulbe na." And ami kokhono bhulini, because those were the kinds of things, he was a smaller person than me physically, and I felt bad that he should be carrying those suitcases. But for whatever reasons, he did help me move out. I was never Chopin's student or colleague. So in a way, our paths crossed again when Chopin actually had left behind teaching in Jadavpur and become an administrator, and a very, very brilliant administrator. And I've known from my own personal kind of affiliations with various people that being a scholar and being a great administrator need not contradict at all, right? I've seen people who believe that institutions need heads and they need people taking on those responsibilities. So I remember that very well. I was also on some advisory committee that Chopin put me on when he took over as director of National Library. And I remember the passion with which we planned a museum. I will not forget that. It was to be a museum of the word, largely the museum of the printed word, but also bring in manuscripts if necessary, where Shukantada was, of course, one of the prime movers, and the excitement of actually, and Chopin by then was working very deeply on print history. He and others in Jadavpur had pioneered this whole new field of print history. And they talked at great length about old presses, old machines. Now, like many things in this city, that museum never happened. From that time, that Chopin would share many intimate details with me about personal life, about the reasons, for instance, why he left Jadavpur and took on an administrative post. He mentioned his difficulty in speaking on great lengths because of the slurring of speech, which of course he got home, and the famous Daktar's Dakat story was something that became apocryphal. But he said that because of the difficulty and because of various tensions he faced in Jadavpur as head, where he pointed at one person, and I will not name the person, and said, if anybody is responsible for my stroke, it was him. I think people in this audience may even recognize what he was talking about, but it was under great tension that Chopin left Jadavpur, I think prior to retirement, and took up. And he said, you know, in National Library, if I want, I could just sit there and sleep the whole day and there's nobody who'll ask me anything, but that's what people there do. But if I can, I'll do something. And what a difference he made to the library. You know, he reactivated the Tagore fellowships. He brought in eminent scholars to take on that fellowship, Gautam Da being one of them. So he was looking out for people. He, of course, digitized the collection. And there's one person who we all remember from National Library called Oshim Mukherjee. He was my batchmate in college. Chopin he was the best librarian I've ever seen. But for various reasons, he could never be promoted to actually becoming a librarian. Chopin for him became God. And he would call Chopin sir. And I would laugh at Oshim and said, look, here we were in college and now he's become sir. And he said, but he can be nothing but sir. So Chopin was like a God's gift to anybody who valued the National Library and its collections, and the new energy he brought to the place is something I remember. I sat on many meetings then. I understood how to handle bureaucrats. So Hari was then director of Matthias, and the one bureaucrat who was being extremely helpful to both Hari and Chopin was Dr. Tuktuk Ghosh, whom we had the occasion to meet as Papia Ghosh's sister, and who later I interacted with when I did my UNESCO project on Durgapur. I understood how easily they could work with the world of bureaucracies and bureaucrats, and how well they blended, because Tuktuk again was a scholar bureaucrat, and here was Chopin, who was as much a scholar as he could become a good administrator. I remember there was a brief period when Chopin took over as additional charge of the Victoria Memorial. It was a few months, and I remember there was a Yale visiting team, and we had gone there. And I teased Chopin, saying, Chopin, my God, 2 institutions in your charge, all within a stone's throw from each other. And in between, there's a turf club. He said, yes, next I'm going to take on the headship of the turf club. And tokon dekhbe ami ghoraye chore ashbo. So this was Chopin's incredible sense of humor. It was the year when the directorship of the center was coming to me. I was really scared. To me, it was a responsibility that my colleagues were entrusting in me. It was not something I was looking forward to. It was not something I felt even capable of. Chopin, on the other hand, had chosen to become a bureaucrat. And I remember small snippets, it was never long conversations, through which he encouraged me. And always sagacity laced with his incredible humor. And then, of course, from the time Jadunath Bhavan was instituted, and the fact that during my time as director, I had the good fortune that Chopin became the West Bengal representative on the board for 2 consecutive terms. There was no question that he was the best ally I could ever have had in the boardroom. I was initially dealing with a very sick chairman when I took over as director. Amitabh Ghosh, for whom I had the greatest respect, as did Chopin, was terminally ill, and there were many meetings he could not even attend. And I don't mind saying it now that I have nothing to do with the ICSSR anymore. The obduracy of the ICSSR and of certain people in it was crossing all limits. You know, in a way, the battle lines were getting sharper and sharper. And of course, with Rosinka, it's now reached other extremes. But Chopin taught me moderation. I think somebody, Vishnu, mentioned that. Chopin would quietly tell me not to get angry. Not that people think I don't get angry, but there was so much tension that used to be piling up. Chopin said, you'll only lose if you get angry. You'll have to, and as he said, he could pull out rules, whether it was when we were debating leave rules, he could immediately tell me what extraordinary leave, what leave on deputation, what various leaves were about. So all of these things, when we were dealing with the service rules, he would immediately. Chopin has been on so many selection committees because he could be trusted. And here was a man who had set up an archive. So in a way, the School of Cultural Text and Records showed the way. I think our archives and theirs worked simultaneously, but Chopin was part of so many selections from Obijits to Komalikas. I think Chopin was always the person to go to. As well, I will always remember both the wisdom and the sense of moderation and the quiet quips that if I happened to be sitting next to him, that he would share through these boardroom battles. When Chaudhuri took over, it was a different battle because here was a chairman who was far more open, far more open to argument and vocal. And Chopin even then managed. He managed without ever sitting in the chair. I mean, sitting in the chair was either Chaudhuri or me. And later, and of course, Dr. Shen will remember. But Chopin always gave the best advice. And I will remain ever grateful to him for that. And especially I'd like to remember that from the setting up, here I was dealing with the Ministry of Culture grant. And as I said, Jodhanath Bhavan Museum and Resource Center came up because of a Ministry of Culture grant. And there are people who advised me all along. Chaudhuri was one of them, Chopin was another one, because Chopin had worked with Ministry of Culture institutions, the National Library, the Victoria Memorial. He gave me, again, solid advice. And we had to set up a steering committee. And right from the beginning, Chopin was a member of that committee. We never had very many meetings. We probably had altogether 3 meetings. But Chopin was indispensable. And I remember whenever everybody is so busy, every time I would call Chopin and I said, will such and such date be free? He would very quietly tell me, Taputi, with my illness, I cannot travel very much. You can assume I will be here. Just find out from the rest who are moving around and I will be there. And I remember there was one meeting which we postponed. And we did inform, but Chopin suddenly landed up. And here he warmly congratulated me from exiting and Prachi from taking over. And we had to tell him that the meeting had been postponed. It was Chopin who suggested that we monetize some of our archival collection. It's been a source of some debate because there are copyright issues. This archive was meant to be free for everybody, but we were also struggling with funds. And Chopin understood that. And he said, why don't you selectively charge users? Why don't you see if you can monetize sections of your archive, sell prints, sell things? So here was the kind of advice we needed, very, very practical advice. So I just feel bad that so many things remain unsaid. When people just go away like this, there are no goodbyes. I could never meet Chopin. We could never reconvene as the steering committee of Jodhanath Bhavan. A meeting is long due now. I never met Chopin in the corridors of the center where I could both tease him and congratulate him on becoming a chairman. He went away, but Chopin will live on. And in a way that so many who we've lost will live on in very different ways in our life. I just want to, I know Bhashati is not listening, but sometime if she'll listen to this recording, I just want to say that I feel for her in a way that is impossible to express in words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tapati. Okay, so among the people who had said they would say a few words, I have only Moidul's name left actually as a colleague at the center. Yes, Moidul, if you would say a few words, yes.
Thank you very much. First of all, this is very, very unexpected news. In fact, I got the news from a different source. I was in Pune for fieldwork to collect archival materials at Pune University. And on 21st of September, I was just having a chat after working in the Jaikal library in the first half, and I was meeting my former colleague, Chaudhuri, the Ayuka director. And in his office, just he told me that Shopanda is very ill and he's in ventilator. So I immediately called the registrar, Dr. Sen, and he also said that he also got the same news. And by 24th of September, which was a Friday, and I was also meeting again in the evening with a couple of my presidency friends who are now settled in Pune. And the press called me, someone in Asia, they called me that whether you know Swapan Chakravorty, was he the chairman at the center? I said that yes. And so that was really bad news. And so first I met Shopanda in 2012, I think in a conference which was organized by Professor Chaudhuri, if I'm not mistaken. And at that time, Partha was also there in the conference, and there was another sports journalist who was there. And so at that time, I completed my DPhil and was applying left, right, center. Came back to Kolkata, and immediately his paper was quite interesting. So I had a kind of discussion with him, and immediately what really struck me off was his warmth and appreciation of a completely stranger. And then I later came to know him closely as a colleague at Presidency University. And he was very, very appreciative of the younger colleagues' work. It was very warm and as well as very encouraging. And I still remember some of his lectures, which he was giving in the Bengali department as part of the lecture series. And I was quite, and his range of scholarship was talking about Greek political philosophy and several other things on rhetoric. And what I also appreciate about him is that he was one of the very few persons who was giving me, sending me actually written comments and suggestions. Some of my Bengali writings that I used to send to numerous people for suggestions, comments, and criticisms. And he was very particular in terms of very detailed comments, whether India need a secular right, whether how he was very much agreeing with positions on CAA and NRC, what will be the pre-poll or post-poll alliance, all sort of things. And I also remember in 2015, in the middle of 2015, when there was an initiative to dislodge the entire admission admission tests at presidency, and some of the departments were quite opposed to it, and some of the departments were in favor of the decision. But I remember he was one of the very senior professors to give a moral support to those departments, of course not officially, but he was giving a moral support informally to those departments who were in favor of the admission test. And finally, those who were in favor of the admission test, they won the argument. And of course, the Joint Interest Board then from that year took the charge of conducting admission tests at Presidency University. Now, and later when he became a chairman, he was, of course, his humor was quite notable, and everyone acknowledged that. And I remember in 2019 in a AGM, he said that he was quite enjoying his retired life. And so once he became the chairman of the center, last year I called him and I said that, look, in Bengal, nobody now gives the slogan, China's chairman is our chairman, and nobody also quite care about the left front chairman, because his influence has certainly waned over the years. But now center's chairman is something which is really important. And he was having a hearty laughter. And so we will miss him, of course. And I think center at this critical juncture needed a person like him who was an able bureaucrat as well as a great scholar. And he was very, very much quite he knows the technicalities of things. So he knows the rules. He knows how to deal with bureaucracy, and he would have given certain very constructive suggestions for the center's future. So certainly, so younger scholars, colleagues, and teachers will certainly miss him, and of course his friends and family. I have deep condolences. On that very day, I wrote a very short message to Bhashwati, and of course she was kind enough to reply back. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Moidul. I did write to Bhashwati to ask both her and Shurjo to speak if they felt like it, but they are not in a position, they said, Bhashwati, they said, to join or speak. I hope they see this later, but they expressed their inability to join us today. With that, I have come to the end of the volunteers or people who had said that they would speak. But I can see many people here among the participants who have known Swapan for a very long time. I saw Uday. I don't know whether Uday is still here. Rajoshi Dashgupta is here. Doipayan is here. Just randomly from whatever I can
He's
see.
also here. Lakshmi is here.
So, Lakshmi is also here. So if anybody wants to speak, please just unmute yourself and you're welcome to say a few words.
May I say a few words, please, Rosinka? This is
Yes, of course. Sorry, who is this?
Arundhati Rai.
Yes, where yes.
Actually, my association with Jadavpur is very little. And what enormously struck me was two situations which nobody has mentioned so far, events. One was Gayatri Chakravorty's, conversation with Swapan Chakravorty at G.D. Birla Sabhaghar. I have never heard a more sparkling, scintillating conversation, both in English and Bangla. And they had really a ball of a time there. When I met him at the staircase when he was walking up, he laughed and he laughed and he laughed. I said, I was enthralled by both your performances. But I think the biggest take, I would say, on Swapan was when he was the director of the National Library. I don't know how many saw that exhibition, The Journey of Italy to India. It was a fantastic exhibition at Bhasha Bhavan. One had to see it to believe it. Soumitra Das and I, we both went on 2 consecutive days to capture as many shots as one could. And when I met Swapan at Victoria Memorial for some commission of slides, when you say talk of bureaucracy, it was done instantly. So I mean, all that was spoken this morning, so appropriate and so beautifully. I just want to pray that his great soul may rest in peace, Rosinka. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Would anybody else like to say anything at all?
Very quickly, Rosinka, can I? Just a few words?
Yes, please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. It's very sad to be on occasions like this, and because of this corona, one seems to have spent all of 20 and 21 just doing this. So it's really immeasurably sad. I've never been I wasn't a sort of a close friend of Swapan or indeed a colleague, but Swapan was part of that larger Calcutta academic scene in which one grew up. So every time one went to Jadavpur to the English department, I recall one of my friends saying that is Swapan, and he came up with this incredible performance of really scolding an undergraduate student for having turned up an essay which was poorly cited, and said that, what do you take me for? And he really sort of exploded. And I don't think I've ever forgotten that image of this really, of this scintillating teacher who was talking and scolding the student, but in course of that rebuke, showed so much of his scholarship. And he was sort of part of that scene in which we grew up, and we were sort of cutting our own academic teeth in the 80s. So Chopin's personality is something that sort of stuck really deep in my memory. I got to know him and Bhashwati later on, partly again because Bhashwati was a friend of Shireen and we were sort of part of a larger social network. So we met and, I've had the pleasure of listening to both of them. Of course, listening to him speak in seminars, particularly on the Book History Project. And then subsequently had a couple of occasions, both in the National Library, where he went out of his way to actually help with whatever one wanted, but with very minimum fuss. I think what I remember about Chopin is the sort of very light touch and yet acerbic wit, and the ability to make you laugh, even as he sort of could be intimidating with his sparkle and wit. I also remember him in some of the meetings we had in, not before he became chairman, but he was member of the board when I still was there. And I recall the, the facility with which he understood bureaucratic rules and yet offered the right kind of advice and warmth. And it's something that I really miss as part of a world which has just got so shrunk because of COVID. So I'll miss him as I will miss so many who have sort of moved on. So I just wanted to say that, Rosinka, and thanks for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Lakshmi. If there is anybody else who wishes to speak, please unmute yourselves and you're welcome to say a few words. We are now sort of running into 1.5 hours. So if there is anybody at all who wants to
I just wanted to say one small thing. One lasting legacy that Chopin leaves behind is the small museum he set up at Presidency. Now, in a way, I was hoping Shondipon, who's not there today, would speak because they recently
the Presidency Museum. Yes, I was hoping Shobhik might mention that.
One thing he told me, and I remember again in the course of trying to make a museum in a house with very little original objects as we were. In Presidency, he had the same problem. I remember talking to him during a brief time when we were in Glasgow together on a conference, and we were discussing museums and how we go. Later, like Chopin, in a private conversation, he confided in me. He said, the work that I could never do at National Library, the museum, where you all were all part of the planning, I could fulfill some of that ambition by setting up the museum at Presidency. So this was Chopin being frank. He's saying on a much smaller scale, on a very humble scale, we could do it. And the bicentenary was the occasion when I think he worked very closely with Anuradha Lohia and with a very young team. Shondipon said that he was really the guiding light here in both setting up an archive, a digital archive, and in putting together the museum. There's a brief video where Chopin introduces the museum. It's a lovely piece. And Ashish Sharanlal, who worked at Jagannath Bhavan with us, also helped set up the museum. So I just wanted to put it there, and that will be a lasting legacy to Chopin's many kinds of expertise, one of them being setting up a museum out of very little original objects, but very imaginatively done. Thank you. I just wanted to put that there.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. Actually, the museum is something that will live. So, it should have been mentioned. And I'm glad you did. Chopin was part of so many projects. He had compiled a huge file, an application for Calcutta to be declared City of the Book, if I remember correctly.
City of Literature.
And,
City of Literature.
Yeah?
City of Literature.
Yeah, City of Literature, City of Literature, City of the Book. I never set my eyes on the thing, but I remember the size of it as he brandished it. And again, he had put so much of himself into that, but that never came to fruition, whereas this did, and the museum is still there. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, Tapatri. Thank you. So unless there is anybody else who wishes to speak, I will sort of end today, because we who have been here since the beginning, we've been at the meeting for almost 1.5 hours now, and we should end here. I especially want to thank people who outside of the city, Jatin and Vishnu, especially very old friends of Swapan, for taking the time to be with us today. Thank you for being with us. And with that, I'll bring this meeting to a close. Thank you.